Thanks to those joining me live and to those that'll be joining me on archive. DStyleBoxing here. Thumbs up the video, support the channel, hit that notifications button. That way you can get me on your phone, your smartphone, wherever the hell it is. Okay, whenever I come on live, or your computer, your tablet. Serious story here. This is not someone that we all know about or anything like that. And this is how a lot of deaths in boxing happen. It's fighters we don't know about. Okay. So this is a story released. I saw it today, but by Rappler.com. All right, and the writer is George Matthews. At least it says here from the import website that I'm looking at this from. Anyway, all right, and Jeffrey Claro falls into a coma after being knocked down in a sparring session and dies at the hospital. Jeffrey Claro was a Filipino pro boxer based in Makati City. Died on Sunday, October 22nd after falling into a coma following a sparring session. He had just turned 20 on October 18th. All right, so he fell into a coma about 5 days ago. Claro, who's pro boxing, he was a 1-4 boxer. He had been sparring at the ex-Cons boxing gym and in Mandaluyong City. Right? Sorry if I didn't pronounce that right. That was on Friday, October 20th again. That's when he collapsed. He was taken to the medical center before being transferred by a private ambulance to the Hospital in Manila in Malat, which has a doctor who specializes in the brain, okay, a neurosurgeon. Right, he remained in a coma. Okay, now he passed away at 11 a.m. It doesn't specify if it was on the same day, which is what I'm looking at. It doesn't say if he died that same day or not, or later on, but nonetheless, he did pass away. He was with his father, sister, and girlfriend at the time of his death, and a 2-year-old daughter, which he is unfortunately leaving behind. Palawan, just minutes after he died, said Jen Javelana, a boxing patron who had been helping Claro. Okay, he's the one that gave this information to the media. Claro had been among the dozens of boxers whose CT scans were deemed fakes. Following a GAB investigation that discovered several scans with identical tracking numbers emanating from the clinic in Batangas and other sources. Claro's license was not revoked, but he was not allowed to fight until turning in a new one as far as the CT scan. So according to Mitra, Claro had submitted a new scan on September 9th and was scheduled to fight on November 19th in Tarlac, Javellana. Okay, there you go. These cities are hard to pronounce, but nonetheless, he was scheduled to fight on November 19th, so that's why he was sparring. Let's see. Javellana said that though they had not signed a contract together, she had welcomed him to the gym as he sought to get his career on track, and helped him get a CT scan from Olivares General Hospital. And they were trying to get him off the blacklist, but nonetheless, what this comes down to, which is a bunch of words, and these hospitals are hard to pronounce. Okay, but anyway, so they found a new brain, an injury to the brain that was new and an older brain injury. So it brings into question the other CT scan, because he had already submitted a fake CT scan. They had him submit another CT scan, which then they said was okay, and he got his license to box. But then when he died, they did another CT scan, and they found an older injury in the brain. And this is why you shouldn't fake your CT scans. There is a reason they do the CT scan in the first place? It is for your protection. Now, this is a sad story, right? This is a very sad story, but there's more to the story, of course, but I think it brings light to, number one, that boxing is not a game. Okay, boxing is not something to play with, right? You don't play boxing. It's a very, very dangerous sport, right? Deaths can occur. Now, unfortunately, in this case, it wasn't sparring. I obviously don't know the details of what happened in the sparring. I don't know what happened in the sparring, right? But I do know that it led to his death. You know, I don't know what type of investigation we put into this. I just don't know. Boxing is a way out for a lot of people in a lot of third world countries. It's a way out. Okay, it's a way out of poverty. It's a way to feed your family. So fighters will do almost anything to just get an opportunity to get in the ring, to get an opportunity and train, to get an opportunity and spar. Okay, to train for a fight, get paid for the fight. They will do anything, right? Many of them learn on the job. He had just turned 20 years old, and he obviously felt very passionate about it or really needed to box because he was one of the boxers that turned in a fake CT scan. And obviously a second fake one because they found an older injury on the one they did in his death, right? So in other words, he shouldn't have been sparring. He shouldn't have been, boxing. Now, just in general, when another human being is targeting your head, that's not something to play with, right? Now, what does this mean in the grand scheme of things? One could say, well, maybe this was just some freak accident, right? Well, again, if he was found to have turned in a fake CT scan before, it doesn't sound like that much of an accident, right? You have to question that there would have to be done a thorough investigation would have to be done to find out why he was one of many boxers apparently that were submitting a fake CT scan. There seems to be some type of pattern there, all right? Not with him personally, but just with boxers in that area, right? So it's a sad story, man. This is not a sad story, but all you can do from tragedies like this is learn from it and see what we can do, right? Now, boxing is a worldwide sport. We can't regulate the whole world, right? We can just control what's going on here. And I do know this. So what does this teach us? It teaches us that that boxers do physicals for a reason. Boxers need to disclose what type of medical problems they have for a reason, right? And boxers need to be thorough with this because who pays the price when a fighter dies like this, right? If this is, I don't know what's going to happen in this case, but if this had happened in the U.S., right, the family would have sued the gym, and very likely that gym would go out of business, right? When we already have boxers that pass CT scans, they're healthy as a whistle, and the chance of dying is still there. The chance of sustaining a terrible injury, a brain injury, is still there, right? That's always going to be there, but we don't want to increase the chances if these fighters are not deemed healthy enough to fight, right? A CT scan is nothing to play with. Nothing, especially the links that brain injuries and boxing have with one another. It's nothing to play with. Fighters' health, just in general, is nothing to play with, right? So I'm going to indirectly refer to something here, and I think most will catch what I'm saying. But if a fighter, for example, all right, has problems and he's going to the ER because he's very unhealthy and he has a lot of health problems and he has to take medications because he has something like, I don't know, like high blood pressure, right? Then that's something that needs to be taken very, very serious. And if the fighter did not disclose this information, then at the end of the day, they're hiding something. Now, maybe it's not that they're trying to hide cheating, but maybe they're just not healthy enough to fight. They don't want their livelihood taken away from them. But then you have to put yourself in the shoes of that sanctioning body. Do you really want to sanction a fight when you know that a fighter is not healthy enough to fight? And if something happens to that fighter, you're going to have to fork out millions because the widow of that fighter can sue you. And they might have a very good case in court because you showed neglect in sanctioning a fight and overlooking the medical problems that said fighter had. We had a situation in New York where a fighter was in a fight, right? And he tragically, I mean, obviously the fight was never stopped, but if you watch the fight, he was still fighting back. It was hard to blame anybody. But the neglect was after the fight when he said he had a headache and the doctors just ignored it. And he started puking and they threw him in the back of a taxi instead of using the ambulance that was at their disposal. And this fighter ended up in a coma and he's not very functional right now. The family sued. And the greatest injury case ever was won. It was $20 million, 20 plus million, that the taxpayers of New York City had to pay because of the neglect of the New York State Athletic Commission. Now, I'm just giving you some examples. You should know these stories, but this is not a game. So for fighters out there that want to say that they have X medical problem, and that's why they have to use medications that just so happen to have banned substances that can be used as masking agents to cover up for PEDs, that coincidence aside, that we need to take a serious look or not into the reality that maybe these fighters should not be fighting. If a young kid that was 20 years old found a way to get a fake CT scan and a fight got booked, I understand this is another country and it's not as regulated. I get that. But he's still a 20-year-old kid, did not have a lot of money. He's obviously boxing for that reason. What do you think fighters with better resources could do? You don't think a fighter here can get a doctor to sign off on some prescription for them? Of course they can. Of course they can. All right? So we have to take in all this stuff into account. So for a lot of these fighters using medical problems as an excuse to use medications that just by coincidence happen to have substances that are used to mask PEDs, right? Let's just say that's a big, awful coincidence, right? Then we need to really take a deep look, because this is a sport where fighters die. So we need to take a look into that and say, hey man, if you're going to the ER just for doing ordinary stuff, like just ordinary stuff that everybody does any day, that ordinary stuff that 80-year-olds do, like hanging out at your house. If you're going to the ER, then maybe you don't belong in a boxing gym. So to me, this is saying, not only should we not buy, like forget whether or not we believe these fighters, if they want to use medical problems as a reason as to why they need a therapeutic use exemption, In many of these cases, we should really reconsider whether or not these fighters should have a license to box. We need to really assess whether or not these fighters are healthy enough to box. And if we're not assessing these things, then what is the point of doing a CT scan? What is the point of doing a physical? If you did a physical on a kid in high school, right, and you found that he had high blood pressure problems, in the middle of class, all of a sudden, the teacher had to call the ER, he had to call the ambulance to show up to take this kid, right, to the hospital, to the ER. Do you really believe that the high school coach is going to put him in the starting lineup that Saturday or that Friday, that is, Friday Night Lights, to play football? Of course, no responsible coach would do that. And if they did, and they knowingly did that, then the parents would sue the school if anything happened to that kid. So why do professionals not need to meet that same standard? This is not a game. This is not a game. Now, obviously, dying in sparring is not common, but injuries in sparring are common, right? Now, another look we have to we got to look at here. Another thing we have to look at here, I worded that wrong. We need to look at what does boxing need to do here to really assess, itself in a way, okay? Because right now, look, we have a sport that, in my estimation, for the most part, right, is very, it's not very regulated, but it's regulated enough in most cases, okay? Now, there's still things that boxing could do to improve itself and all that, right? But this is an opportunity for the sport to obviously take in and really analyze itself and how it's conducted itself, from sparring, from how you train up and coming fighters. What type of sparring? Should sparring be as physical as it's always been? Because one thing people never consider is, over the years, you look at old boxers, and everybody says, "Oh, those were all the wars he had, all the fights he had." What we don't see is all the gym wars. What we don't see is the countless sparring sessions that they had in every training camp, or the random impromptu sparring sessions they had, okay, at sparring gyms, or at boxing gyms, I should say. I think in this, there's enough knowledge, in my opinion. There's enough knowledge about boxing. Enough experimentation has been done to where we have a general idea of what works and what doesn't work. So we don't really need to do a lot of trial and error. And what I mean by that, we don't need to do a lot of intense sparring. I'm not saying sparring shouldn't be intense. At the professional level, to a certain degree, every fighter needs to make that judgment in their own training camp. But we really need to analyze on how intense and how often sparring should take place, because a lot of brain injury and trauma, okay, it's everyone overlooks the sparring, right? And many think, well, they wear headgear in sparring. Well, headgear is great to protect you from a headbutt or getting a cut or something like that, which you don't want, heading into a fight. But what it does not do is prevent damage to the brain. If anything, the headgear allows you to take even more damage, okay, to the brain. It allows you to take more of that. So I think that there could be a way to train fighters, still produce great fighters, without doing some excruciating sparring. Because I need to question why this kid had brain damage. This kid only had 5 professional boxing fights. 5. And he died due to a brain injury. Okay, he had to fake a CT scan before that, and obviously faked another one. And he's not the only one, according to this report, that did it. And there's no reason to believe that they're not faking CT scans in Mexico, that they're not faking CT scans here. There's no reason to believe that physicals are being overlooked. There's no reason to believe that whatsoever, right? So this is a time here where, unfortunately, this young kid died. You know, and it's terrible. I feel bad for the family, but somewhere along the way, this kid was led in the wrong path. Okay, it's no 20-year-old pursuing boxing should have severe brain injuries. That should not happen. That should not happen. The gym he was sparring at needs to be investigated. It has to happen. Now, we have no control of that here, but if that were to happen here, it should be investigated, right? So while I enjoy hearing about old boxing stories and you know, and all the boxing wars and the smokers that they would put on and all that's great, but you know, we need to reevaluate how these kids are being brought up. There's a way to teach a kid skills and do enough sparring to where they do enough to learn, you know, and we need to go ahead and I don't have all the answers here, but I'm just giving my thoughts. Let's see if anybody put anything here. By the way, for those listening here, at 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, I'll be doing a live Q&A chat. Feel free to leave comments in archive, and I will my videos, and I will address those in the QA. All right. I have no idea why the YouTube app always fails the first time I try to load it. I have no idea. This is annoying. And I have YouTube Red. Why does it do this? I don't get it. You should be thankful, YouTube, that I have YouTube Red. What's up to Blood Boxing? Bad Bart says this is terrible. Mr. Dog Dan threw him into the back of a cab. That's some Vince McMahon shit. Well, there you go. Bad Bart. I still think they need to arrest whoever let Nick Blackwell spar after his brain injury. True story. Bad Bart also says a lot of fighters will say the consistent training and sparring is worse on their bodies and brains than the fights themselves. Yeah. You know, there has to be a way for fighters to spar, but just enough sparring. Sparring needs to be supervised and needs to be looked over. Okay. Owners of these gyms need to have rules that they need to make sure that the fighters are evenly matched. A lot of mismatches happen in boxing gyms, right? And what they'll do in a lot of cases, and I get why they did it, though, don't get me wrong, but it's dangerous to do it. So a young kid will come in, and especially if he's brash and very confident and cocky, they'll throw him into the wolves, break his nose, beat the shit out of him, okay? And then the reason they do that is because if the kid comes back the next day, then they know he's serious, that they know he has a passion to continue. Now, I know they do this to save time, to not waste their time, but, you know, it's maybe they should stop that, you know, and I know there's a lot of classic stories, and that's the, you know, I know Mr. Doc said the story once about Thomas Hearns walked in, it broke his nose, and or Emmanuel Sword told somebody to break his nose, and I mean that's great, and that's boxing lore, and that's great, but they should stop that at this point, right? And because this isn't cool, like we just don't need. Maybe he's, you know, whatever the fighter isn't going to have the hunger that maybe he will waste your time, but at least you won't kill him, okay? And I think that's important. But there you go. All right. Now, by the way, I'm not here to bash boxing history, and a lot of these stories are awesome. right? I mean, they are. And that's why a lot of these old school fighters are the real deal. You know, it's the fighters that were on top in the old days were as alpha male as you could fucking get. Okay? Because they were thrown into the wolves from a young age. They were always sparring. That to earn respect in the boxing gym before they earned respect anywhere else. Right? So, but that was a different time. We did not know as much about boxing and the injuries long term that it can cause. We just weren't as educated at the time about boxing as we are now. Okay, so we need to, and the trial and error has been done. We know what works, what doesn't work. We can teach someone to be a good fighter without putting them through hundreds of gym wars. We could do that. All right. Anyway, this is DStyleBoxing. Keep it boxing, and I'm out.